You are 35,000 feet in the air. You press the flush button. There is a roar like the plane itself is inhaling, and in half a second, everything is gone. No splash, no trace, just a terrifying vacuum sound and an empty bowl. You have done this 100 times and never once asked the question, where does it go? The answer is stranger, older, and messier than almost anyone flying today realizes. And somewhere in that answer is a story about frozen human waste falling out of the sky and crashing through the roof of someone's house. This is what actually happens after you flush. To understand it, you have to go back to a time when the answer to where does it go was simple. Down. Just down. For most of aviation history, airplane toilets were not sealed systems at all. They were little more than a hole with a flap, sitting above open sky. Early commercial aircraft in the 1930s and 40s used what amounted to a chute. Waste dropped into a small holding chamber, and on some aircraft, it was released directly into the atmosphere mid-flight. The same basic principle as a chamber pot, just moving at 300 miles an hour. Passengers rarely thought about it. Engineers rarely bragged about it. It was the plumbing nobody wanted to look at too closely, on a machine everyone was still amazed could fly at all. That system survived in modified form for decades. Instead of open dumping, aircraft carried chemical holding tanks, a blue liquid deodorizer mixed with water sitting beneath the toilet, doing double duty as a disinfectant and a smell suppressant. Every time you flushed, a fresh dose of blue liquid rinsed the bowl. This is the origin of a phrase you have probably heard and never understood: blue ice. But we will come back to that, because blue ice is where this story turns dark. The chemical tank system had a serious flaw. Water is heavy. A wide-body aircraft carrying enough liquid to rinse dozens of toilets across a full flight was hauling hundreds of pounds of unnecessary weight. And weight is the one thing every airline engineer is obsessed with eliminating. Fuel costs money. Every extra pound costs fuel. So in 1975, an inventor named James Kemper patented something that would quietly reshape every bathroom you have ever used on a plane: the vacuum toilet. Kemper's system was almost absurdly simple in concept and brutally effective in execution. Instead of relying on gravity and gallons of water, it used the pressure difference between the cabin and the outside atmosphere. At cruising altitude, the air outside the aircraft is thin, roughly a quarter of the pressure at sea level. The cabin is pressurized to feel like you are sitting somewhere around 6,000 to 8,000 feet, comfortable enough to breathe normally, but still far thinner than the ground you took off from. Engineers realized that difference in pressure was a resource just sitting there, unused. So they built a system that opens a valve connecting the waistline to that pressure gradient, and the vacuum does the work. A rush of air, moving at speeds close to 100 miles an hour through the pipe, drags everything down and away using a fraction of a cup of water. That roar you hear when you flush is not a special sound effect. It is the sound of a pressure differential violently doing its job. This single invention is why modern aircraft toilets use around half a pint of water per flush, instead of the gallon and a half your toilet at home uses. Multiply that across a jumbo jet with multiple lavatories on a 10-hour flight, and the weight savings translate directly into fuel savings, which translate directly into profit margins so thin that airlines genuinely obsess over exactly this kind of detail. Your bathroom habits, it turns out, are a line item, but vacuum or not, the waste still has to go somewhere. And this is where the myth that refuses to die comes in. Ask almost anyone what happens to airplane sewage, and they will tell you with total confidence that it gets dumped out over the ocean, or over farmland, or wherever the plane happens to be flying. It is one of the most widely believed pieces of aviation folklore on Earth, and it has not been true for half a century. Modern aircraft do not have a dump valve that opens mid-flight. What they have instead is a sealed holding tank, usually located near the rear of the aircraft, close to the tail, engineered to withstand pressure and temperature extremes. Every lavatory on the plane feeds into this same tank through a network of vacuum lines. The tank has one job: hold everything until the aircraft lands. There is no button in the cockpit, no procedure, no scenario in a normal flight where that tank is emptied while the plane is airborne. The waste sits there, sealed, for the entire duration of the flight, sometimes 12 or 14 hours on the longest routes, A genuinely enormous quantity of human waste from hundreds of passengers, waiting in a tank a few feet from where flight attendants serve dinner. So how does it actually leave the aircraft? This is where the story gets almost comically unglamorous for something involving a machine capable of crossing oceans. After landing, a specialized ground vehicle drives out to meet the aircraft, and within the industry, it has a nickname that has stuck for generations: the Honey Wagon. It is not a joke name invented for comedic effect. Ground crews genuinely call it that, and have for decades, the way soldiers give affectionate names to unpleasant jobs. The Honey Wagon connects a hose to a service panel on the exterior of the fuselage, usually located near the tail, seals the connection, and pumps the entire contents of the holding tank out through a closed system. From there, the truck drives the waste to a facility at the airport that treats it essentially the same way a municipal sewage treatment plant treats yours, before it re-enters the water system in a form nobody would ever recognize as having come from seat 34C. This job is not glamorous, and it is not safe to get wrong. Lavatory service technicians work with equipment specifically designed to prevent leaks and spills, because a failure at this stage means human waste on the tarmac, delayed flights, and a health hazard for ground crews working just feet away from moving aircraft, fuel trucks, and baggage carts. It is one of the least visible jobs in the entire aviation industry, and one of the ones that would shut the whole operation down almost immediately if it stopped happening. The numbers involved are bigger than most passengers would guess. A single holding tank on a wide-body aircraft can hold somewhere in the range of 200 gallons, and on a long-haul flight packed with 300 or 400 passengers, that tank can come close to full by the time the wheels touch down. Multiply that by the tens of thousands of commercial flights landing every single day, all over the planet, and you are looking at an invisible logistics operation moving an almost unimaginable volume of waste through airports every 24 hours, quietly, through hoses and trucks nobody outside the industry ever thinks about. It is one of the largest waste management systems on Earth, and it runs entirely out of public view. There is another myth worth clearing up here, because it is almost as widespread as the mid-air dumping story. The idea that the vacuum is strong enough to pull a person down with it. Generations of nervous flyers have half believed the flush could pull them into the pipe, and the fear has become a genuine piece of airline folklore, the kind of thing parents jokingly warn their kids about before a flight. The truth is almost the opposite of frightening. The valve at the bottom of an airplane toilet only opens once the flush is triggered, and it seals again in well under a second, long before the vacuum could ever meaningfully act on anything sitting in the bowl. Flight attendants will tell you the real danger isn't suction, it's timing. Flushing while still seated can startle you with the noise, but the physical force involved has nothing on the machine your imagination has built. Now, back to blue ice, because this is the part of the story that turns an engineering footnote into something that has genuinely fallen out of the sky and hit people's homes. Even with a sealed system, things go wrong. The most common failure is a leak at the valve or seal, connecting the waste tank to its exterior service panel. When that seal fails at cruising altitude, waste can slowly leak out through the aircraft's skin instead of staying contained. The moment it hits the outside air, at temperatures that can plunge to negative 50 degrees Celsius at cruising altitude, it freezes almost instantly. Combined with the blue deodorizing chemical still used in many holding tank systems, the result is a chunk of frozen, blue-tinted waste clinging to the exterior of the aircraft, sometimes growing for hours as more leaks and refreezes onto it, layer by layer, like a horrifying reverse snowball. For most of the flight, this frozen mass just rides along, invisible to everyone inside, stuck to the belly of the plane. The danger comes during descent. As the aircraft drops into warmer, denser air, the ice begins to melt and loosen. Combined with changes in airspeed and vibration, chunks can break free and fall, sometimes from thousands of feet, toward whatever happens to be underneath the plane's flight path. This is not an urban legend. It has a name in aviation safety reports: blue ice falls. There are documented cases stretching back decades of frozen waste, crashing through the roofs of homes, smashing car windshields, and landing in gardens directly beneath approach paths near major airports. In several cases, homeowners initially assumed a meteorite had struck their house, only for investigators to determine the object was frozen human waste that had fallen from a passing aircraft. Airlines and aviation authorities do not advertise this. It happens rarely enough to stay out of most people's awareness, but often enough that it has its own recognized category in incident tracking, and often enough that insurance claims have specifically named it as the cause of roof damage. The frequency is genuinely hard to pin down, because most incidents go unreported. Whoever gets hit rarely realizes what actually landed on their property until an inspection identifies it, and by then, the evidence, quite literally, has melted away. What is documented, though, is enough. Enough case files, enough insurance disputes, enough aviation authority bulletins, that blue ice is not treated as folklore inside the industry. It is treated as a known, if rare, mechanical failure with a genuinely unsettling consequence for anyone standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Airlines have spent real engineering effort trying to eliminate this failure mode entirely, because a lawsuit from someone whose roof was destroyed by frozen sewage is not the kind of publicity any airline wants. Improved seals, better heating elements around vulnerable valve areas, and more rigorous maintenance inspection schedules have made these events far less common than they were in the 1970s and 80s, when the vacuum toilet system was new and its failure points were still being discovered the hard way. But far less common is not the same as never. Aviation authorities in multiple countries still log new cases most years. It is worth remembering that intentional mid-air dumping is not just discouraged, it is illegal and has been for decades under international aviation regulation. Every commercial flight is required to land with its waste still sealed inside the aircraft. So when blue ice does fall, it is never the result of a policy, a shortcut, or a decision by anyone in the cockpit. It is always a mechanical failure, a leaking seal, or a cracked valve nobody caught in time, the plumbing equivalent of a burst pipe happening 7 miles above the ground instead of behind a wall in your basement. That distinction matters because it means every documented case is treated by investigators the same way a broken component on the wing would be treated, as a maintenance failure to be traced back, understood, and prevented from happening again on the next aircraft. There is something almost poetic, in a deeply unpleasant way, about how this entire system works. Humans built a machine capable of carrying hundreds of people across an ocean in a matter of hours, a genuine miracle of physics and engineering that would have looked like sorcery to almost every human who ever lived before the 20th century. And bolted onto the bottom of that miracle is a problem as old as the species itself. What do you do with the waste? Every civilization in history has had to solve this problem in some form, and every solution has been shaped by the same basic constraints: weight, cost, and the physical reality of gravity. The Romans solved it with elaborate sewer systems and public latrines. Medieval cities solved it badly, by throwing it into the street and hoping it rained. And the aviation industry, after decades of open chutes and heavy chemical tanks, solved it with a vacuum system so effective it has barely changed in its basic design since 1982, when it became the industry standard almost every commercial aircraft still uses today. What makes the story stick with people isn't really the mechanics of vacuum pressure or holding tanks. It's the image. It's the idea that somewhere above your head, right now, on a plane crossing the sky, there is a sealed tank a few feet from a drink cart, holding the accumulated waste of everyone on board, waiting in total silence until it lands. And it's the much rarer, much stranger possibility that occasionally, without any passenger ever knowing, a piece of that waste breaks free thousands of feet up, freezes into something the shape and color of a small blue meteor, and falls, completely silently, toward a random point on the ground below, indifferent to whatever happens to be standing there. Most flights end exactly the way you'd expect. The plane lands, the honey wagon rolls out, a technician in protective gear does a job nobody thinks about, and the tank is empty again before the next set of passengers ever boards. The system works, quietly, thousands of times a day, all over the world, and almost nobody who flies has any idea it exists. But every so often, somewhere, a homeowner walks outside to find a hole in their roof and a strange blue chunk of ice sitting in what used to be their living room ceiling. And for one very confused afternoon, they get a lesson in aviation engineering that they never asked for and will never forget. The next time you're on a plane and you hear that sharp mechanical roar right after you flush, you'll know exactly what's happening. Air moving at nearly 100 miles an hour, dragged by a pressure difference between you and the thin, freezing atmosphere outside, doing in half a second what used to take a gallon and a half of water and an open chute over open sky. It's not magic. It's 100 years of engineers slowly solving the same unglamorous problem, one flush at a time, 35,000 feet above a world that has no idea how close it sometimes comes to falling out of the sky.